Hello and welcome to the Newscentre. We're breaking a big story this evening. It is a MoneyControl exclusive in an interview with Prime Minister Modi, a wide-ranging interview ahead of the G20 ministerial. The Prime Minister has spoken about the upcoming G20 Summit, the economy and a lot more. So let's get down to some of the key highlights, the key excerpts from that big exclusive interview. The Prime Minister said, and I quote, that India has also been advancing the interests of the developing world, including the interests of nations not represented in the G20, like countries of the African Union. Further, perhaps for the first time in the history of the G20, such countries like Indonesia, Brazil, the troika of the developing world, has come together. This troika can amplify the voice of the developing world at a crucial time when there are increased tensions due to global geopolitics. That is the Prime Minister ahead of the G20 Summit. Speaking about India's G20 presidency, the Prime Minister said, and I quote again, "When we laid out our agenda for the G20, it was welcomed universally because everyone knew that we would bring our proactive and positive approach to help find solutions for global issues. When global leaders meet, then they are filled with a sense of optimism about India due to the efforts of 140 crore Indians across various sectors. They're also convinced that India has a lot to offer and must play a larger role in shaping the global future. This has also been witnessed in their support for our work through the G20 platform." So that is the Prime Minister on India's G20 presidency. He also highlighted the impact of the G20 presidency on the public and the economy. He said, and I quote, "Our democratization of the G20 presidency is our investment in the capacity building of people, especially youth of various cities across the country." We will, of course, bring you more excerpts from the Prime Minister's exclusive interview to our sister publication, MoneyControl.com, right through the evening here on CNBC TV18. Of course, you can catch the full interview on MoneyControl.com tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. But for now, let me hand it back to my colleague Parikshit Luthra. He's standing by with more on the day's big story of the day, the controversy over Bharat or India. G20 invites from the President has sparked a firestorm. The entire interview coming up with Parikshit right after this. Parikshit, over to you.
Well, yes, that dinner invite that's gone from President Droupadi Murmu to G20 Heads of State has, of course, sparked a controversy. It went out with a masthead which said, "President of Bharat." Usually, all invites from the President's house go with the masthead which says President of the Republic of India. Now, many in the government, many ministers have welcomed this move, and they are saying that it's only natural that India should be recognized as Bharat, and India is a colonial term which has been used in the past. There are also reports coming in that the government may move ahead with the bill to amend the constitution and rename India as Bharat in all official communication. And all of that will have to begin with Article 1 of the constitution, because experts are telling us that if you only want to use one out of Bharat or India, then that would need an amendment, and you'll have to change a lot of terms. For example, the Supreme Court of India, the Chief Justice of India, and the Government of India for that matter. Let me now take this across to two senior advocates who are joining us, Vikas Singh, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court, and Sanjay, Hegde, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court as well. Mr. Vikas Singh, if I can begin with you. First of all, does this move require an amendment to the Constitution? Mr. Singh, you're on mute.
I don't think any amendment is required to the Constitution. When this partition was being discussed and Mr. Jinnah and Nehru were at the negotiating table, they were insisting, Jinnah was insisting that India should be named Hindustan and Pakistan should be Pakistan, whereas Nehru wanted it to be India because of the simple reason that he wanted to have the advantage of what India was prior to independence. Now, when the Constitution was being drafted, this in 1950, in the Constituent Assembly, there was a lot of discussion whether it should be Bharat or India, and most of the members wanted it to be Bharat. But since some members felt that we should retain the name India, some kind of a compromise was arrived at. And that is why the Article 1 starts by saying India, that is Bharat. So actually the Constitution has used and Bharat interchangeably. And if today India feels that we don't need to have the background in which the original name India was given, and they simply want to convert to Bharat, a simple notification by the government will suffice, where they'll say that wherever India is occurring in the constitution, it will be Bharat. And the logic for the same is simple, that if you want to amend the constitution, amend will mean that you're wanting to bring a change. But if the constitution itself provides that India, that is Bharat, then there is no change being brought about. It's just a nomenclature. And if the nomenclature you want to now use Bharat only instead of India, I don't see any constitutional amendment required. It can be done.
But Mr. Vikas Singh, Article 52 of the Constitution mentions President of India. It does not say President of Bharat. So don't you think Article 52 would have to be amended? And what about the usage of the term India in the Constitution everywhere, when it comes to the Supreme Court of India, when it comes to the government of India for that matter, even on your passports you have Republic of India. Don't you think a lot of changes would be required? And especially what about Article 52, which speaks about the President of India?
Not only Article 52, Parikshit, it will also be several articles. So wherever India is mentioned, wherever, it will be replaced as Bharat, and it will be by a simple notification. So the textbooks which will be having the Constitution of India hereafter will have Bharat instead of India, wherever, if this decision is taken by a notification to simply say that henceforth we will be Bharat. So I don't think this requires any amendment, formal amendment. Once the decision is taken that it will be Bharat instead of India, then wherever India is mentioned in the Constitution, wherever, whether it be Supreme Court of India or whether it be Union of India or whether it be the President of India, everywhere it will be deemed to be President of Bharat or Supreme Court of Bharat, etc. It will not have any impact on, as if that there has been any amendment to the Constitution. It's just a simplicity name change, which is...
Mr. Singh, do you think...
Yeah.
Do you think it's a wise move, considering the complications it may cause? We had always been called India, and this is how we were referred abroad as well, in all our official treaties as well. Do you think it is a welcome move to rename India as Bharat?
Well, that is not for me to comment on, because that's a purely political decision. But I'll tell you, there are so many nations in Europe whose names have changed in the last 30, 40 years. And we've all got accustomed to the name change whenever it has happened. I don't think it's such a big issue. You used to have Yugoslavia, you used to be an earlier name of Czech Republic. So all these countries had different names, and these names have changed. And even if you see what India was prior to the partition, India was a much larger territory. So when the India Independence Act 1947 was passed by the British Parliament, they said that India will be whatever is sovereign India minus what is excluded as Pakistan. So really speaking, that continuity was maintained when the India Independence Act was drafted. But India Independence Act was repealed when the Constitution was. So once it was brought in, the country had a clear choice of making its own name. And the country thought of having the duality of India, that is Bharat. So I don't see any confusion, because the Constituent Assembly itself discussed Bharat very extensively. And actually, a lot of people were interested, but they didn't want a... So they said, let's have India, that is Bharat, and that is why you have both the names in the Constitution and included as interchangeably referred to the Constitution.
All right. Mr. Vikas Singh, we've run out of time, but I'd like to thank you for joining us on this program. Let me also get in Sanjay Hegde at this point. Mr. Hegde, thank you for joining us and waiting patiently. PDD Achari, well-known constitutional expert, former Secretary General of the Lok Sabha, told us earlier today that if you only want to use one word, that is either India or Bharat, if you only want to use the word Bharat, then that would need an amendment to the Constitution. Do you agree with that view, or would you also go along with what senior advocate Vikas Singh has said, that only a simple notification from the government would do and there is no amendment needed to the Constitution?
I would not only disagree with what Vikas Singh said, I would violently disagree. Going by that logic, tomorrow if you were to name the Prime Minister of India as Emperor of India and say you don't need a constitutional amendment for that, and it's a mere question of a notification, then there is something sacred, about the Constitution. It is something over which our founding fathers worked years to bring forth a document under which this nation would live. And it was a carefully crafted constitutional compromise which brought in India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states. If you want to efface India from the constitution, you will have to go through the process of a constitutional amendment. It cannot be somebody's say-so. It cannot be a mere babu somewhere in North Block or South Block issuing a government notification.
Right. Also, the complications that would come with such a move. There are so many bodies, so many institutions which have the term India. Do you think it will be a complicated process having to change all of that?
Administrative convenience is another thing altogether. It is not as if countries have not changed their names. Vikas gave several examples of Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia, but those were all countries which broke up. I do hope that people realize that there is a great emotional attachment to India. The people from Kashmir to Kanyakumari joined India, that is Bharat. They did not join a unitary kind of name which refers largely to the heartland. If you change the name, the level of emotional attachment may or may not remain the same. Yes, administratively, what will you be calling the Indian Administrative Service? The Bharat Administrative Service, bus. You went on doing Skill India, some other Startup India, Wake Up India, this India, that India. Now what? It is Baskar India. This is absolute. I should, for want of a better word, this is a ridiculous debate. India and Bharat have existed together. There is no reason that they cannot coexist. You want to use Bharat in some official terminology or the other, or in official documents, please do so. But you cannot efface India. Not without a constitutional amendment, and not without possibly securing the approval of the states.
Do you think there will be strong objections going forward? Especially state governments, opposition-ruled states will, of course, oppose the move. Do you think this will be an easy one for the government to get everyone on board and get the bill through the parliament as well, where they have the numbers?
In parliament, they do have a majority for the moment. And we have seen how parliament has functioned in recent times. There have been people who have been just shut up. There have been people who have been thrown out. You may run a bill through parliament, but at the end of the day, a bill through parliament will not amend the constitution. If you have to amend the constitution, then you would require at least 2/3 of the members present and voting. And it is an open question as to whether there are certain sections where, of the constitution which would require ratification by the states as well.
Right. So you are saying this is going to be a challenging way forward if the government intends to do it finally. For the moment, there is no official confirmation of from the government whether they do plan to move such a bill in Parliament in the special session starting 18th of September or not. But yes, we do know that the official invites that have gone from the President's house to G20 leaders have gone with the letterhead which says President of Bharat and not President of the Republic of India. Mr. Vikas Singh, Mr. Sanjay Hegde, thank you very much for joining us on this discussion. We'll keep an eye out on this big story for our viewers, but we're going to take a short break at this point. When we return, we'll focus on the G20 preparations, and we will be joined by former Minister of State for External Affairs, Shashi Tharoor, who speaks about the brand India message that has gone out to the world, the absence of Xi Jinping and President Putin, and also the massive security preparations and the lockdown-like situation in the national capital. All of that coming up with Shashi Tharoor after a break. Welcome back. The G20 Leaders Summit is around the corner and the government is busy trying to build consensus on the document and the wording of the Ukraine-Russia war. It will be important for India to have a consensus document to send out a strong message about its presidency. To talk about India's G20 preparation, the possible outcomes, is former Minister of State for External Affairs, former diplomat and now Congress MP, Mr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, thank you very much for joining us. How important is it for India to have a consensus at this G20, which looks difficult at this stage?
Well, look, I think we're busy dialing down expectations, understandably, because normally, yes, it would have been very important because the success of every summit is reflected in a joint communique. And every single G20 summit, including the last one in Indonesia last year, concluded with an agreed joint communique. This will be the first one without it. So India has to really make a serious effort to spin it in a way that it doesn't look like a failure. The problem is that it's really one issue that's holding it up. I think India has done a reasonable job on all the other complicated, thorny issues, debt relief, some of the development agenda issues, admission of the African Union. There are various issues. They've tried to bring in language that makes everyone happy. But when it comes to Ukraine, the Russians and Chinese are absolutely unwilling to budge. They want no reference to it, no condemnation, not even deploring the war. And the West says, no way we'll agree to a joint communique which doesn't mention Ukraine. So you've got a stalemate. And we may end up once again with a sort of chairman's summary, which is a very lame, limp conclusion to what has otherwise been such an extravaganza of a G20 year. So it's a bit unfortunate. I don't think it's fair to blame India entirely. The way in which the conflict has evolved, it's become impossible to find a solution. Perhaps they could have anticipated this problem earlier because they already ran into this difficulty when the finance ministers met and when the foreign ministers met. Maybe something could have been done earlier to find a solution. Whatever it is, we're not involved in the inside of it, so we don't know. It didn't happen, and right now it looks extremely unlikely. Certainly a consensus seems totally elusive at the moment.
Right. The absence of Putin and Xi Jinping at the meeting, does it really affect things, the success of the summit overall?
Putin, no, because I think it's been pretty much a pattern now that he's missing most international engagements except within a tight circle of his own immediate neighbors and allies. He hasn't been to the BRICS summit last month in South Africa. He is clearly, if I'm not mistaken, he was absent from Bali in Indonesia as well last year. And his being absent this year is not a surprise. And this is a guy with an international arrest warrant against him. He's prosecuting a war, which is not popular in the world. He knows that if he comes here, he's going to become a lightning rod for negative attacks and criticism by other countries and other leaders. There might be photo moments when people don't shake his hand, all of this stuff. So he says, why do I need this? He's backed off. No surprise there. Xi is much more of a political signal. That is a deliberate snub to India, because she was there at BRICS, and he's going to be holding a Belt and Road tamasha in Beijing shortly, which Putin will attend. So I think it does look pretty grim for us. But my attitude is, if it's grim because we are standing up for our rights with the Chinese, then so be it. I would like to believe that this government has developed a spine since the Prime Minister's most unfortunate statement that the Chinese have taken no territory, when it's known to everybody that the status quo ante, that is before the troubles in Galwan in April to June 2020, has not been restored in many, many points. We had an informal modus vivendi with the Chinese that we would both armies would patrol alternate days, whatever, so they wouldn't get in each other's way. 45 years, the disputed frontier was not a problem area simply because each side respected the other's claims.
Right.
Suddenly, the Chinese have moved into lots of spots, I believe 26 spots, where both sides used to patrol, and now the Indian Army can no longer patrol. They've taken over lands where Ladakhi herders used to graze their sheep and whatever, and they can't graze anymore. These are things that you can find out on the ground. Rahul Gandhi went to Ladakh and met herders who've been talking about that. So if the government were to just go out of their way to appease the Chinese when all this is happening, it really would have sent a bad signal. So I would rather that if India took a tough stand, decided it's going to scrub its kowtowing to China, and as a result Xi didn't come, great. But if it's Xi simply saying, listen, we don't want to take you guys too seriously, you made such a big hoo-ha of this G20, let's see how important it looks without us, that kind of message, then frankly, that is going to be seen around the world as a bit of a snub to us.
How do you think the Prime Minister and the government has been able to portray India or send a message about brand India through this G20 summit?
Now, that's been an impressive thing, because I think no other G20 presidency has made the G20 to such an extravaganza. We've had over 200 meetings during these basically 9 months of our presidency. It's not a full year because we only took over from Indonesia on the 1st of December last year. So in 9 months, over 200 meetings, 58 cities, 32 different work streams. You've had this People's G20 concept with the University Connect and Jan Bhagidari and Hornbill Festival and all sorts of things. A cultural G20, a parliamentarians G20, a think tankers G20. It's been amazing in that respect. There I give full marks to the government that they really took what could have been otherwise treated as a routine diplomatic effort to be dealt with by a handful of so-called Sherpas and essentially forgotten afterwards, which is the case of all the previous G20 ones, and made it into something that really has showcased a certain prominence in a very dazzling way of Indian interests. But having said that, in the diplomatic world, there are some challenges. We're talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and hope and harmony and healing in the world. Well, we need hope and harmony and healing in our own country with what's happening in Manipur, in Gurgaon, in various places that we read in the headlines every day, in New, for example. And the unpleasant news. Foreign delegates are not unaware that we're talking about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam at home, abroad, and weaponizing identity politics at home. I think the sooner that India, and by this I mean the Indian government, get its act together domestically, the greater will be our credibility abroad. If you read the foreign press around the G20, it's almost uniformly saying exactly this. Financial Times today, same message, great G20, but look at what's going on inside the country, which is giving itself.
But is the Congress going to raise this issue with foreign leaders when they arrive in the country? Of course, the security is going to be very tight. They will be in one particular venue and their hotels. But will the opposition try and raise these issues with them?
I don't think so. First of all, we have to fight our own battles at home. We're not sort of, kindergarten school children rushing off to the visiting VIP to get our problems solved. We can fight our own battles. So I don't think we're going to be raising it with foreign countries. Having said that, I've always believed that, ultimately when it comes to foreign policy and international interests, we're all Indians. Ultimately, that India must look good to the world and must have a position of prominence as in all our collective interests. I just want the Indian government not to give our critics abroad the easy excuses they have to attack us because of the government's and the ruling parties' misbehavior in some very unfortunate areas.
Right.
As I say, if you look at the foreign press these days, it doesn't make for happy reading. And that's a pity given all the effort the government has put in. But it could easily have been avoided if the government had only played its hand differently at home.
Right. In terms of certain diplomatic messaging and the challenges for India that you would be watching out for, what are some of those cues that would be important to watch out for at the G20?
Well, I think, frankly, everything is pretty much stitched up before the heads of state get here. So I think the clues are pretty clear. We're not likely to have an agreement on a joint communique. We're going to have 3 heads of state missing, of which the biggest name is going to be Xi Jinping's absence. I believe the Mexican is also not coming, and of course Putin is not coming. Everyone else pretty much is here. I don't think we should expect any other major surprises during the summit. I'm not thrilled about the extraordinary security measures and all sorts of things which are going to be inconveniencing ordinary citizens of Delhi for 3 full days. I think about the daily wage workers, the hawkers, the chaiwalas, and so on, whose livelihoods will essentially be gone. And many of these families...
Do you think it's a bit too much?
I think it's a bit too much. I think when a chaiwala or a tea cart or a vegetable or fruit seller on a cart, or an istriwala for that matter, when they don't make money on a particular day, their families don't eat that day. So depriving them of their livelihood for 3 days was unnecessary and unfortunate. I think some of these things the government has gone overboard. But that's also typical of our security establishment. Everything is overboard. And I suspect it's going to be a nightmare even trying to get onto the streets of Delhi on those 3 days. But having said all of that, we probably will and probably should put on a summit like no other, like none that they've seen in any previous G20s. That would be the Indian success story.
My final question, has India been successfully able to emerge as the voice of the Global South, the bridge between the Global South and the West?
That's the challenge. and I would say we're only been partially successful. The global south is the developing countries, another word for it, the G77 as it used to be. And we've been able to speak for them in some areas. But take, for example, the consequences of the Ukraine war, which have driven up prices everywhere, caused food scarcities in many of these countries, have really affected the economies of the global south. Between sanctions by the North on Russia and the interruption, for example, of wheat and grain exports from Ukraine and Russia and so on, a lot of innocent developing countries in the global south have suffered. Where have we been able to solve that problem? There's a limit to how much we can do. We are feeding ourselves. We're able to actually go around the sanctions with Russia by importing oil with the West accepting that situation, but we've not been able to solve all the problems of the global south in the process. There may be language in the communique or in the chairman's summary that reflects our concerns, and the South's concerns, but I wouldn't say more than that. This bridging role is something that our foreign minister has openly said is going to be a major role for India to play. South to north, east to west increasingly, but I think we shouldn't honestly take on more than we can realistically accomplish, because then we would be judged to have failed by an impossible yardstick.
Right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Dr. Tharoor, and giving us a sense of India's G20 priorities and how much can realistically be achieved as well. Thank you once again for watching Newscentre. Goodbye.